Hi everyone, welcome. This is the first podcast that we are recording from our new studio here in the City of London. So welcome, I hope you enjoy it. Today's guest is Antoine Vernet from UCL, the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction, and this conversation today is all going to be about AI, hybrid working and organisational design and the interaction of those topics. So it's really, really relevant. It's really interesting. Really hope you enjoy it. Antoine, thanks very much for coming in to see us today and appear on our podcast. Can you just give our viewers a brief history about where you've come from and what you're currently doing?
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you for having me first. And so I'm Antoine Vernet. I'm an associate professor at UCL in the School of Sustainable Construction in the Bartlett, which is the Faculty of the Built Environment. I'm a management scholar and I do mostly research around organizational design and social networks, which has taken me originally from being a sociologist to being more and more interested in how we can design organizations so they perform better by thinking both of the formal structure of the organization, but also of the informal relationship between the people who are doing the work within that organization.
As I know this topic was really pioneered at UCL. I think it's going back to the early 2000s.
So there's been, before I arrived at UCL a few years ago, there were already people within my department doing a lot of work around networks in the construction industry and specifically on how informal networks could help or hinder the completion of construction projects.
That's right. So let's just get into the meat and potatoes of the discussion. And for our vegan viewers, that would be potatoes and potatoes. I use that gag every week. So let's just... And the other thing that reminded me of you, Antoine, was that you've started recording your own podcast series with a focus on AI and how it's impacting everyday life and also academic life.
Yeah, so I think it's generous of you to call it a podcast. I record videos less regularly than I would like, and I admire the fact that you're able to do it with such regularity. And that's what I'm aiming for in time, but it takes time getting there. The main focus of those videos is talking about the importance of data literacy to make sense of the world around us, and what that means and how that ties into AI is thinking about what's happening in organizations, but also in society, and what technological change is doing to the way we work, the way we interact with each other, and trying to decipher that using, whenever it's available, using data. And also, I do a little bit of debunking claims that are made with data that are possibly less robust than we would like them to be.
Yeah, I'll share some of your cynicism. And I know on one of your particular videos you've called out Simon Sinek once or twice for making, I guess, unsubstantiated claims or claims which the data that you've got doesn't fit with that.
Yeah, I mean one thing I would say, to be a bit generous to people that I sometimes single out as making claims that are unsubstantiated, is that if you're someone like Simon Sinek and you spend a lot of time on podcasts or on TV, it's pretty difficult to never say something that is not well substantiated, especially when you're in conversation with journalists that are trying to get you to say something interesting and pushing you a bit beyond what is comfortable territory.
I can understand that. He has to say something interesting, doesn't he? Just to keep the brain going.
Yeah, I think.
And it's easy to fall into that trap. So yeah, we'll give him some slack.
I think it's reasonable to give people some slack, but it's also reasonable to, especially in a world, and we're going to get to that when we talk about generative AI, right? One of the things that generative AI makes really easy to do is producing misinformation and creating claims that are possibly twisting the reality in a way that allows you to push forward whatever message you want to push forward. And in a world like that, critical thinking and the ability to realize that a claim is less solid than maybe we would like it to be is an important skill.
Yeah, I know with experiments that we've been doing with ChatGPT and others that you ask it a question, if it gives you an answer, it nearly always comes across as being very authoritative. And if you ask it a question about something you know a lot about, sometimes it's wrong and sometimes it's completely wrong, which is very worrying because it comes out as if it was gospel.
But I think, you're putting your finger on something that's really important, which is the advent of generative AI doesn't make experts irrelevant, because essentially you still need someone with domain expertise to realize when the AI is hallucinating something that doesn't really exist. And because it's always answering in a way that's fairly authoritative, if you don't know very much about a topic, it feels like it could be a correct answer. And without that domain expertise, you lose that ability to say, okay, this part's good, this part's less good. And I think, that leads to two things. The first is domain expertise remains extremely important in order to work with generative AI and to really benefit from the type of assistance you can get from large language models like ChatGPT. You need that domain expertise. And possibly you can still benefit from using a large language model when you have a bit of expertise but not a massive amount of expertise, but you will be really struggling to use it productively on a domain where you have no expertise whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's point's well made, because people were telling me stuff that they've been told on ChatGPT as if it was the truth, and often I don't understand how it can tell lies. I don't understand how that happens.
Well, I think, one way to think about it, and I'm not claiming I'm a technical expert on the way large language model works, but the model doesn't reason in the way we do, and it doesn't have a knowledge base in the way we do. It's a system that predicts what's the likely next word based on a certain amount of previous words that are there. There's other parts of the system, but essentially it's a next token prediction system. What that means is that even though we talk about hallucinations as times where the system gets it wrong, that's not really true. The whole thing is an hallucination. Every answer it's giving you is an hallucination. What's so amazing and so surprising about it is that such a high proportion of the time, that hallucination is actually something that's correct and that's factual. But then the system doesn't differentiate between the time where it's not hallucinating and the times it's hallucinating. It's just doing its thing, and it just so happened that the way they're trained, the very, very large majority of the time, it gives you an answer that's roughly correct, or sometimes very, very good on a specific topic.
Yeah, because I saw a video made by the or the Alan Turing series of lectures, and some super duper professor of AI from Oxford had put some questions in, which were reasoning questions around, what is, if Jack's got 3 apples and this and that, how many? And he gave the correct answer, and he could not tell you how it got the correct answer. But also, then it asked another obvious question, and he got it wrong.
Yeah. So another thing that's difficult with those systems is that, well, first they change very fast at the moment. So if you try something and the system gets it wrong, it's tempting to conclude that the system cannot do that kind of reasoning. But in fact, it could in the next iteration, and also it's possible that there's a better way to prompt the system to get the right answer. A while ago, there were I remember a conversation on LinkedIn with people saying, look, here's a small brain teaser, and AI gets it wrong. And in fact, a few people tried that brain teaser, and by trying a high, 3 or 4 different ways to approach it, to get the system to approach the problem differently, it was able to solve it. So it's very hard to conclude that it cannot do something, and because those systems change so rapidly, and there's more and more large language models of high quality that arrive on the market regularly. Yes. We don't know where we'll end up, right? We've not exited that phase of rapid acceleration, even though there's a possibility that's already kind of happening, because, for example, GPT-4 was released last year, and it's been the best performing model for 10 months now, which is possibly a sign that it's not that easy to get to the next level.
And in terms of getting to the next level, is it that it's got to learn more words because they've got 500 billion words have gone into it, or is it that they need another filter, or how do these iterations?
So I think that's a very good question, and I'm not sure I have a definitive answer, but it's definitely a debate that I see between experts, between people who think that scale is going to solve it. And it's true that from the different iteration of the models released by OpenAI, from GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, etc., the main difference between those models seemed to have been scale, where they were trained on bigger and bigger corpuses. And that seemed to have taken us really, really far, which is quite impressive. But there's a debate between experts in AI as to whether scale alone is going to help us reach the next level, or really what you need is structural changes in the way those models work. And that I'm not enough of an expert to tell you which one of the two is going to work, but it seems that even amongst AI experts, there's a lot of debate about which of those two directions is likely to be the right direction to go towards.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really exciting and fascinating emerged. AI has been talked about for the last 30 years that I can remember, and all of a sudden it's relevant in everyday life. I know we're using it in our business. Let's just turn now to your other big interest, which is organisational design, and whether or not you're deploying AI in your work there. But also the big topic for lots of businesses and lots of leaders is hybrid working and the profound changes that have happened really post-COVID. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on those subjects.
Yeah, so I think, in terms of organizational design and how organizations structure themselves to achieve their goals, I think the hybrid working on the one side and the technological change, and specifically at the moment AI, are two things that will, if organizations haven't started thinking about it, they're going to have to start thinking about it fairly soon. And there's going to be, I think, in the next few years, quite drastic changes in the way we do work. And there's still a lot of open questions. If we start with hybrid, there's a lot of open question about how good or bad that is, and what are situations in which it makes sense to have workers, employees who spend more time remote, and in what situations it makes sense to try to have people in the office more often. And I think there's good reasons why you want people in the office. There's also good reason why you could want people to work remotely. I mean, the first reason you might want to have people work remotely is that if you can reduce your real estate footprint, you can save significant amount of money, especially if you're a large organization. And we're working right now with an organization that has an office outside of London, and they're downsizing their office but moving it inside of London. And at the same time, the people working in that office will go from working 3 days to 4 days in the office to working 2 days a week in the office. And one of the reasons they do this is because a better location, at least that's their calculation, a better location is more beneficial to them than having more people in the office at any one point in time. But there are also potential drawbacks from having people working remotely. There's a lot of informal interaction that happen in the course of people being in the office, and that speaks to one of my other interests, which is social networks and the study of how people interact in the workplace. You lose some of that when people move remotely, right? The serendipitous interaction where you discuss a problem with someone that you happen to run into, or you walked to their office, that's easier to do and easier to it's easier to resolve certain things this way than if you're remotely having to set up a meeting with the person, find a time in their calendar, and then potentially there's that leads to delays, etc. Or it leads to certain interactions where you would have discussed a topic not to happen at all, because every interaction has to be formalized into, we're going to make a meeting, we're going to meet at that time, or you're busy, you will only be able to do that next week, etc. Whereas if you're in the office, you naturally bump into people and have those conversations as the opportunity arises. The question is, how beneficial are those informal interactions? And the answer is, of course, it depends. It will depend what kind of work you do. It depends what kind of problem you have to solve in your organization. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. And I think depending on your organization, it might be that what you do necessitates you to have people in the office almost all the time. But it could also be that what you do would allow you to have quite a lot of flexibility and quite a lot of people working remotely. I think one last thing on this topic is, and that's something that Peter Capelli, who is a professor at Wharton, has talked about quite a bit. He talks about, he calls it independent contributors. So the more you are an independent contributor, and what he means by that is the more your work is not depending on input from someone else, and the work of someone else is not depending on your input. One example of this would be university professors in the social sciences who don't have a lab and can write, for example, a scientific paper almost from scratch on their own. In that context, you can have people working remotely a lot more easily, because you don't have to rethink the way you manage interfaces, meaning your product passing on from one worker to another, your product or your service.
Okay, so I'm trying to, you've used a very specific example, which is a university professor. But if we were to take the street we're on, which is full of lawyers, they've got a client, they may have a team, they've got third parties they've got to deal with. But on the other hand, I know anecdotally that they've got a lot of remote working now.
But I think, professional services firms more generally, not just lawyers, but also consultant, your consulting team that's working on a specific project is almost an independent entity, right? They don't need to be in the office of the consulting firm to do their work. In fact, most of the time they tend to spend more time with the client. And then depending on the client, you will have the broad scope of situations, right? Between you need to be in the office of that client every day in order for the work to get done to, in fact, you don't really need to be there that often. It will also probably depend for those professional service firms of how much hybridity the client is doing themselves, right? If a firm is very heavy on hybrid working, they probably won't be wanting their consultant or the lawyers they work with to be on their premises that often. Just on one of the concerns I know a lot of business owners have around hybrid working is how do you keep the internal relationships going, the culture going. Now, I suppose the second part of that is, well, do you need to, or does the culture has COVID and its impacts changed for a lot of businesses, the working culture forever? Well, I think that's a very good question, and I don't think there's a simple answer. But I think you're right. One of the difficulty with hybrid working is, and one thing is the culture of the organization. One thing is the socialization of people that are coming into the firm and starting in junior or less junior positions. But what happens when everyone's on site is that new employees are learning the ropes from existing employees that they just rub shoulders with. And if you're working remote a significant portion of the time, this is less likely to happen. And potentially that could, for example, lead to higher turnover, which wouldn't be desirable. So possibly that means organization would have to think more explicitly about how that socialization happens and how you pass on the culture of the organization to the new entrant into the firm. So there's a lot of questions there that I don't think have a straightforward yes/no answer, and what can we do to keep the culture. But I think what is true is that organization will need to think more explicitly about what is important is in what they call the organizational culture, and how they can ensure that whatever mix of hybrid and in-person they're having, they're doing what's needed to keep it going. But I think the other on the flip side, that requires works for leadership of organizations to figure out what it is they really mean by organizational culture, because in some cases we use the word to mean something a bit vague, but we're not really sure what value we get from this and what are the crucial part of it. And I think thinking about this explicitly then can give you some ideas of what you need to work into preserving and what is maybe less important. And to finish circling into your last point, as COVID probably changed the way we work forever. Well, forever is a long time, but it seems that it has had an effect that is enduring, because when we exited the lockdowns in a lot of countries, there was a feeling that we would go back in person, and that hasn't happened, right? The amount of hybrid working has remained a lot higher than it was before the pandemic. And it doesn't look like we're going back to a pre-pandemic level of working in person. So I think it will definitely have long-lasting effect. It's already having long-lasting effect. Whether that will continue, I don't know. But
well, Antoine, I hope your researchers give us the answer, because it's a conundrum that I know many business owners are wrestling with and worry about. But Antoine, that's been a tremendous discussion. Thank you very much for coming in. And all we've got to say is say bye to our viewers. Bye. See you on the next one.
Thank you.